Okay, are we good to start? Great. Thank you. Welcome everybody to our July meeting of the Career and Technical Education Committee. Um, Thank y'all for being here. We have some important topics on the agenda today. So, Catherine, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just kind of walk through what everyone can expect. The big item that we want to talk about is the joint CTE vision implementation plan. We discussed this at our April meeting, and the team took in feedback and iterated on this, and we're ready to review and vote on that today. That'll then move forward to the AIB and the Board of Education. So that's an exciting part of the agenda today. We're also going to just review industry recognized credential business rules. We've talked about this and as a committee voted on the what the criteria are for approving these. And we just want to walk through what are the business rules, how are we actually doing this on an annual basis, and then we have a biannual review process to look at all of the, so there's an annual process to review and approve new IRCs, and then every 2 years we are to go through the entire current list and make sure that the IRCs that are on that list should remain on that list. And then we'll review upcoming priorities, decision points, and milestones that we can expect for the remainder of 2026 and into 27. So that is our plan. Okay, before we get started, we need to take roll call of members and vote to approve our meeting minutes and agenda. So to take roll call, I'm going to ask that each member, please be on camera, introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. I'll start. I'm Myra Norton, chair of the CTE Committee, but my day job is at Johns Hopkins University, where I oversee commercialization and entrepreneurship.
Hi, everyone. Portia Wu, Secretary at the Maryland Department of Labor. Excited to be here today. I'm following the order in the chat.
Brian,
others should do so too.
Brian, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Brian Cavey. I am chair of the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council, and I am International Vice President at the Heat and Frost Insulators International Union.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharnetta Young Callahan. I am a Governor's Workforce Board member, and my day job is a Director of Workforce Initiatives for CVS Health.
Good morning. Michael Thomas, Vice President, Workforce Development, Continuing Education, Baltimore City Community College.
Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you.
Buenos dias, everyone. Apologies for being camera off this morning. Great to be here. Elena Quiroz Lavanes, Interim Secretary at the Maryland Higher Education Commission.
Thank you. Okay, Catherine, do we have a quorum?
Yes, we have 6 members present on the call.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we've got 3 items on our consent agenda, the public meeting agenda for today and meeting minutes from our previous meeting, and then the industry recognized credentials business rules. Before we vote to approve the consent agenda, I'm going to ask Molly to just walk through with us as a reminder the business rules for IRCs.
All right, next slide. Thank you, Myra. So today I'm going to be walking through, just giving a really high level overview of the industry recognized credential business rules document before you as part of the consent agenda. As a reminder, in 2024, you all approved a policy defining what credentials would count within the Blueprint's 45% goal. And really the intent and purpose of the Blueprint was making sure that students are earning credentials that are valued and recognized by employers. So the policy really sets out 7 required criteria and 2 recommended or preferred criteria to really help set the parameters around what credentials would count in the 45% goal. Now, later today, you guys are going to talk about the 45% goal in much more detail, so I won't spend time on that here. But as a reminder, when you all approved and the other entities approved the CTE vision at the end of last year, that really further specified the 45% goal, that 1 in 4 students would meet the 45% goal by completing a high school level registered apprenticeship, which means 3/4 would need to earn an approved industry recognized credential. So really, our policy defining credentials and how we go about implementing that remains really important as part of the Blueprint's goal. And so the document before you really puts in writing how the team at MSDE and the CTE committee staff have really operationalized the implementation of that policy, right? We've gone through 2 years now of industry recognized credential application processes. And so this really puts into writing, how we go about reviewing and considering credentials and really providing guidance, to our stakeholders, especially local school districts, on how we are implementing this policy. All right, next slide. So the document is really put together in 2 sections. One is sort of the current state operations, right? The things that we've put into place as we've iterated through the process over the last 2 years. Primarily being, pretty obvious one, but getting in writing that, when an application is submitted, they've got to submit proof how that credential meets each required criteria. And now the application also has a compendium that includes specific documentation of, these are examples of what needs to be submitted for this criteria and so forth. And so really we're expecting at this time, moving forward, that applicants are submitting a complete application, right? We're not getting one at midnight, October 31st, that just is a 1-pager. The expectation is they've gone through a few cycles. MSDE has several technical assistance sessions, 2 this month, actually. And there's a lot of guidance for applicants to submit a complete application. This section also goes into, just sort of the fundamentals of some, what's an administrative change that doesn't require reapproval versus a substantive change. That means a credential is changing significantly enough that it really needs to be re-reviewed and re-put before the committee. The second section of the document really outlines the ongoing life cycle rules, really moving our policy forward into, for lack of a better word, phase 2 and sort of the future of industry recognized credentials. And so the primary purpose of this is outlining what our biannual revalidation process looks like. In our policy, we said that we would revalidate, re-review, basically approved credentials every 2 years. And so, starting that cycle would be the fall of 2026. And so we developed sort of an outline of what that revalidation process will look like. I will say the caveat of, this being sort of the initial year we're doing it. It's kind of think of it as a pilot, for a couple reasons. Basically, even though we said we'd review them every 2 years and we would do the first review this year, we actually only have 1 year of implementation data to go off of, right? The policy went into effect starting the 2025-26 school year. So in the fall, we'll be able to start seeing, what credentials were earned and so forth, but, that's 1 year of implementation data. So quickly to summarize what that revalidation process looks like, we want to make sure, again, that these are credentials that employers actually value. So is that credential, there's like 210 that are approved in the first cycle, is that credential still showing up in job post data for jobs in and around Maryland, right? And then if not, sort of several steps that the credential would need to go through. So one would be revalidating it against the other required criteria, and then also engaging employers within that industry that the credential is part of on, is this credential valuable to you? Do you know what this is? Does this mean something to you? And then also an opportunity for public feedback as well. especially, you think about local school districts or local workforce boards to provide that. And sort of those being the steps as part of this revalidation process. This section of the document kind of also goes into where are we going? What's the future for industry recognized credentials? As we think about, and as a committee, we're really thinking about, we're going to be able to start finally seeing data and outcome data. And what are the long-term longitudinal data indicators that we want to look at, and really moving Maryland towards a true unified statewide list of what are approved credentials. And so to summarize, this document really establishes predictable review and revalidation processes to ensure that our credential list within Maryland remains responsive to employer demand, while still protecting students. You'll see that there's a sunset and phase out protocol so that if a credential is no longer meeting our criteria, students that are sort of midway through earning that credential aren't suddenly having to shift and drop that. So there is a sort of a 2-year transition phase out. And so, this really puts together both balancing the quality, of our policy with, still sort of protecting employers and students in the process. So do you all have any questions before I hand it over to Chair Norton to read the motion for approval?
This all makes sense to everybody? Any questions, concerns about, I mean, I know these are things we've discussed over the last couple of years, but just making sure.
I just have a quick thing, which is thank you, Molly. This is very thorough, and I think this process makes sense. I know we're going to be coming up against this in the fall, and we have the top line numbers of what's happening with the IRCs. But when we come to that conversation, I think seeing the distribution about which ones, I know it'll be too soon to have any wage data or anything, but I think that'll be helpful even to see that. And looking forward to seeing what the analysis shows us about how much they're showing up in job postings other places.
Yes, me too, to be honest. It's like, you put something together after a couple of years and we're finally going to actually see, is this working? Is this doing what we wanted? So yeah, we're all looking forward to, our team and MSD's team is looking forward to digging into that more and sharing that. Thank you.
And Molly, just to make sure we're all clear about timelines,
Yep.
You all will be coming back to us, I think, in our January meeting. Is that right?
Correct.
With all of the recommendations, the data, the analysis, in
Yep.
terms of both the regular, the approval of new IRCs and the evaluation of the existing list.
Correct. Our January meeting will remain our standing meeting to review, as you just said, the new credentials to consider for approval and how the revalidation process and the data, how that ended up.
Great. Okay, if there are no further questions, then I would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay, the consent agenda passes. All right, now let's jump into the joint CTE vision implementation plan. Just as a reminder, if you want to go to the next slide, this implementation plan really serves as the like actual execution roadmap for how we're going to achieve the vision that we've already approved. So if you remember, we've approved a joint CTE vision with our colleagues at the Board of Education and AIB, so that we're all and labor and MSDE, all the parties involved, sort of saying here we're aligned behind a common vision. And this implementation plan is just that. It is the again, same, we're all aligned behind the same implementation plan and set of accountabilities, et cetera, to achieve that vision. In our April meeting, as I shared earlier, we talked about this. We had a draft of the vision implementation plan and took in feedback from all of us, and the staff from Governor's Workforce Development Board, Department of Education, and Department of Labor all worked collaboratively together to incorporate feedback, and that led to the comprehensive final draft that you all have received and had a chance to review. So next slide, please. Let's just give a little bit of content and background refresh in terms of how we came to this. We have this 45% goal. This committee laid out what is a high school level of a registered apprenticeship. How do we define that? We went through and did a lot of definitional work as a part of this committee. And one of the things that I think many, not just us, but our colleagues at MSDE, labor, et cetera, all felt that was missing in the 45% goal was, all right, if we're talking about an implementation plan, we need to be a little bit more explicit about what is the goal for specifically growing registered apprenticeship for students in high school. That is the gold standard. That's why that's what was contemplated in the blueprint. And so while the 45% goal includes high school level of a registered apprenticeship and other industry recognized credentials, the intent is really to optimize, maximize the number of high school graduates that are participating in high school level registered apprenticeship. So the goal that was laid out in the vision statement is that 1 in 4 college and career ready graduates will have completed the high school level of a registered apprenticeship in the 2031 graduating class. So, and that means 3 in 4 will have achieved the 45% goal via an industry recognized credential. So a lot of what you see in the joint CTE vision implementation plan is how are we going to get to those numbers, right? What is the plan to do that? That is clearly going to drive a lot of engagement with employers. Employer recruitment is a huge part of that. And then also, you know, high school preparation, LEA preparation for, you know, what does it mean to onboard that number of registered apprenticeships, and how are we going to support that through RTI, et cetera. So those are sort of the major pieces of the implementation plan. You want to go to the next slide? Here's just a reminder, right? So by school year 2030, 2031, 45% of total graduating students who are college and career ready. Okay, so what does that mean? MSDE defines college and career readiness as mastery of English language arts, mathematics, and, where practicable, science necessary to succeed in entry-level, credit-bearing community college courses or post-secondary training. So to initially meet this benchmark, students must score a 4 or 5 on the 10th grade Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, or MCAP, exams in mathematics and English, or their equivalent on approved successor assessments. So just so everyone has that, that's what we mean when we say college and career ready. So again, let's start at the top. 45% of total graduating students who are college and career ready, who meet that standard, at least 1 in 4 must be high school level registered apprenticeship completers, and at most 3 in 4 may be industry recognized credential, I should say, because high school level registered apprenticeship is an industry recognized credential, but at most 3 in 4 may have completed another industry recognized credential. We all on the same page? Any questions about?
Myra, I just want to clarify, because just the way the slide broke it up is a little bit confusing.
Sure.
I think it's 45 of, like, it's one sentence, right? Because it looks like 45% of total, right. And then who meet, it's 45 of the percent of the graduates who meet the standards of those. This is what must happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Basically, and this is part of what we did, what we clarified in this implementation plan, right? To your point, Secretary Wu, that the denominator, if you will, the denominator is graduating students who meet the Department of Education's college and career ready standard. That is the denominator that we're using here. So thank you for clarifying. That's important. Okay, and then if you go to the next slide, I want to just share a little bit of context in terms of progress, where we are now, where we hope to be. So here's what data currently shows about our progress. In school year 24-25, we had 6,859 industry recognized credential completers, 99 high school level of registered apprenticeship completers. Total number of CCR graduates in the 24-25 school year was 29,433. And so if you look at what that means in percentage wise, as in terms of where we are relative to the 45% goal, that put us at a little under 24% of CCR graduates meeting the high school level of a registered apprenticeship or other IRC goal. Where we hope to be by 2031, so the 2030-2031 school year, is that we would have a little over 12,000 industry recognized credential completers, over 4,000 high school level of registered apprenticeship completers. We're anticipating that the total number of CCR graduates would be 36,000, and that would put us at a little over 45% of CCR graduates meeting the high school level of registered apprenticeship or other industry recognized credential goal. That was a mouthful. I hope that is clear. Everyone mathing the math, are we following that? Okay. There's a bunch of asterisks which have a lot to do with the fact that data is not perfect. I'm just going to say that kind of full stop. That's the theme. One of the things you'll see in the implementation plan is we want to work on really building out the data system so that we have more accurate metrics, but we're not going to let perfect be the enemy of the good. And the data that's represented here has been validated as closely as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to Shamara and let her talk us through the development process for this implementation plan.
Thank you so much, Chair Norton. Good morning, everyone. And just reiterating the importance of collaboration in this work. What we did, again, was partner with the Maryland State Department of Labor, the DWDAL team, and the apprenticeship team, as well as the Maryland State Department of Education, to develop these strategies and action items, as well as milestones to help us achieve that 45% goal that we keep talking about for 2031. And again, it was very important for us to additionally get feedback from people that are on the ground that will be implementing this work. And we were very intentional about getting feedback from agency leadership, including the Accountability Implementation Board, the AIB, as they oversee much of the blueprint work. We had feedback from LEA CTE directors, as well as a little bit of legislative input and other stakeholders, including MORAD. And so the goal is to ensure that these strategies are not just statewide priorities, but realities of how this can be implemented on the ground. And so the result was this plan that was not just made by state agencies, but also just input from people on the ground, which is why we took additional time to work on this strategy. So of course, we approved the CTE vision statement in December, but again, wanted to make sure that we had as much stakeholder engagement and feedback as possible to ensure that this is not just a plan, but something that we can use to move forward. Okay, and so next slide, please, Catherine. And so our timeline here, I mentioned that just a little bit about where we started. And so here for several years, we have been working towards that 45% goal, but this plan will actually actualize that, and with defining that the 45% goal, not just 45%, but that 1 in 4 of students who are college and career ready as deemed by MSDE, this is how we came to start putting milestones, goals in place. And we chose, 3 goals that are attainable over the next couple of years towards 2031. And so the work began with establishing that policy foundation, including defining the high school level registered apprenticeship. And then from there, we moved to developing the Maryland CTE framework and then the joint vision statement. And so with the vision approved by not only the CTE committee, but also the AIB, the State Board of Education, we focused, our focus shift from defining the what and moving towards the how through this implementation plan, as Chair Norton had mentioned a little while ago. And so again, over the past few months, working with sister agencies, our state agency partners and implementers on the ground, we arrived to where we are today with reviewing the plan here. And again, continuing opportunities for stakeholder engagement so we can refine this. And so ultimately, every milestone on the timeline is intended to just move us toward that 45% by 2031. Next slide, Catherine, please. And so following that stakeholder engagement, the CTE Committee, Maryland State Department of Labor team, and MSDE, we worked together to incorporate this feedback and develop this final version of the implementation plan that you have in your meeting materials. The plan is organized around 3 strategic objectives, and you'll see number 1 is employer engagement, student access, as well as agency alignment. And what this looks like is that Maryland State Department of Labor primarily owns the employer engagement piece. Student access is owned by Maryland State Department of Labor, and then the CTE committee, we work to ensure that there's an agency alignment to move this work forward. And so those are the 3 pillars. And again, you can look in the plan to get more detail, but what the employer engagement piece looks at is growing the number of high school level registered apprenticeship opportunities available to students. And then the focus of objective 2, the student access piece, is expanding awareness of and access to high school level registered apprenticeships and those industry recognized credentials that Molly just talked about earlier in the meeting. And then the last is that agency alignment. And so that is that strengthening the data infrastructure piece that Chair Norton just mentioned, as well as ensuring that we're all aligning on the statewide goals and just improving coordination across state agencies and partners to support this implementation, because it's a heavy lift here and we have a lot of work to do between now and 2031. And so with these 3 objectives, the goal is to just provide a foundation for moving from the shared vision to coordinated action and measurable outcomes. And with that, I'll pause. There's any questions here?
I had a question and / comment. I know we want to approve this plan, but I think I see Secretary Coker on the line. I'm sorry, I just of course closed that window, but it does feel like the employer engagement, and I also want to applaud all the work that was done since the last meeting on this plan. I think it's a lot more focused and like calling out specific deliverables, specific sectors where we really need to, focus our attention. So I recognize it took extra time, but I applaud the team and thank you to our partners for really spending the time on this. I do want to note that I think others like Department of Commerce and DOSIM, like other state agencies and frankly, local economic development agencies will be key in this employer outreach. And so, even though we may be the lead partner, I'm not sure those are always listed as the additional supporting partners. And it feels like they're really critical to this work on the business engagement. I'm sorry for not noticing that before, and I don't know if Secretary Coker is available or someone from Commerce wants to say anything to that, but I know we've been having other conversations about how we can engage those agencies.
Yep, we are happy to partner and we'll continue to do so, regardless of whether the name is in print. We're on board.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, Secretary. And I think as we go through this and think about employer engagement and the partnership needed around that, we were able to collaborate a little bit in some insertions into the plan itself, even while assigning kind of like primary ownership over core objectives. And we do have commerce and EDAs and or EDOs and a few other of the types of entities you mentioned listed as supporting partners in key areas throughout the plan. And if there's places we missed, we definitely can amend that. And Secretary Coker, thank you for being here and for your commitment to the partnership. Definitely have seen some really exciting things forming as we have these conversations and as your teams across labor and commerce do as well. And just really, really excited for what's ahead on this. Is there any other questions before I jump in? I'll give folks a second.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
And you're right, Rachel. I'm sorry, I was probably looking in the wrong
Right.
sections. I do see them in some places, but definitely, I think working
Maybe
with
some more
regional EDA folks, that's the local, partnership on the ground that we're often missing, and that I think is our growth potential. The one other thing I did want to say, apologies. I know for those who aren't following along super closely, that going from 99 to over 4,000 number might seem really daunting, but as is laid out in more detail in the joint plan, we have over 1,000. I think we're about 1,300 youth apprentices in Maryland right now. So converting a lot of those programs to sort of full-on high school level registered apprenticeship obviously is some lower hanging fruit, and those are employers and schools that are already engaged in programs. It's just a matter of moving them to a different level. And so there is a lot of groundwork that's been laid there, lest anyone think, wait, how are you going to go from under 100 to several thousand? The gap isn't quite as big as it appears.
Thank you, Secretary Wu. And it looks like Secretary Kira's, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but I see that your hand is raised.
Thanks so much, Shamara. Kiros, but I'm happy to send the phonetic spelling at a different date. No worries. It is a mouthful. I can hold my question, so I'm curious if now or later is the right time. It really has to do with the second objective and the coaching and how we're communicating these opportunities to students, particularly, as many of you know, the Maryland Higher Education Commission just adopted its state plan for higher education. The state, in addition to this 45% goal, now has a complementary goal around post-secondary education with 75% of adults 25 to 64 would have some type of post-secondary credential. We've been working together across agencies to figure out how to make sure that the counts all align to Secretary Wu's point of like, what are the gaps and how do they need to be closed? But where I'm going with this is, how are we talking to our middle schoolers and high schoolers about what happens after high school graduation and how they are set up for multiple pathways if they are in receipt of either an IRC or on their way to completing an apprenticeship? So I can repeat that question later, but just to summarize, how are we talking to high schoolers and middle schoolers about what happens after high school?
That is a great comment and feedback, and that is where we can leverage the career counseling work that we're also implementing and doing with the blueprint. There's room there for that, as well as just coordinating again with MSDE on the communication processes to ensure that LEA directors and leads and administrators are all in the loop with things that are happening at the state level. So there is room for us to collaborate there on the communication structures, and that is written in, I believe, in the milestones and action items for this work as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I know Executive Director Stevens Parker has been working on workforce. So there's so much exciting, so many.
Rachel Stevens Parker. No, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. I will just quickly go over a little bit more depth on some of the objectives. We actually started that just now in this conversation, so I'll just be additive as we cover each of the core objectives of the plan. So objective 1, that piece on increasing employer engagement, We obviously understand, I think collectively, that the supply of apprenticeship opportunities is essential to this goal being feasible. Those are the opportunities we need to support student access to. So as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of partnership involved in this. Some key actions we've laid out include setting some more specific targets. We started with some annual targets statewide that I'll get to in a moment to help us grow toward that 2031 goal. But really breaking those down into sector and occupational goals so that the teams working together on the ground really have some clear targets to continue aiming toward, and so that state investments can continue to align around where the low-hanging fruit is, where the opportunity for expansion is, and where these priorities sit. The Department of Labor has also already activated a number of really exciting new investments, including those that were packaged as part of the RAISE Act of 2025, including a new qualified intermediaries initiative and grant to drive sector-specific engagement and expansion, as well as additional incentive programs for employers, especially those engaging high school level registered apprentices specifically. I won't go through every kind of key action item in the objective, but I will just acknowledge again that partnership opportunity and really working with our partners at Commerce, our economic development partners. And I'll also kind of call out, I think as board leadership, I know, Myra and I, our chair, Delali Duraza, and I, we've been certainly talking even in our June board meeting a little bit about the importance of the board and the business leaders on the board also being part of this and also becoming engaged, being able to become champions because they are also supporting work toward this goal directly. So that is something, I'm voicing here in this meeting as something our board is, and this committee will be looking at and thinking about, and how to activate our own employer base as potential, pilots, champions, and of course, continuing to engage them as we have as sources of feedback as we do this work. So some major milestones, we know there's going to be some new intermediary investments from the Department of Labor that will be important for this goal later this summer. By the end of the quarter, we're also going to be completing those sort of draft statewide targets and sector goals. By the time we come back to the November meeting of this committee, there will be some additional detail to report there, as well as on a number of other milestones in the plan. And we also have some longer term goals and milestones in the plan, such as some technical assistance, recruitment actions, and other activity, kind of setting some goals for quantity to help reach the initial annual targets. I'll pause there for a moment, and actually I'll just quickly touch on one key piece around this employer engagement number. In working with our colleagues, especially in the apprenticeship team, what would this take? What would this mean? How many employers are we talking about here? We've kind of landed on an initial sort of metric to be tracking against for this first year, looking at 300 employers who are recruited to and committed to employing high school registered apprentices by fall of 2027. So it's a bit of a runway, but certainly a significant increase. And Secretary, you mentioned some of that potential low-hanging fruit, Secretary Wu, around converting youth apprenticeship employers toward this opportunity. And so that's certainly one avenue that the teams will be exploring. But that's kind of the fine point number that we will be tracking against for this first year. We'll be able to see what are we learning, how is progress going against these metrics as we do the first year implementation. Any comments or additional thoughts on Objective 1? Cool. Great. All right, this is a meaty one, but they all are. And on to Objective 2. As we create these opportunities, supporting student access and awareness of these opportunities, high school level registered apprenticeships, and also our other industry recognized credentials. We should have touched on this probably at the beginning. This plan really focuses largely on actions around the apprenticeship piece of the goal, because based on these last couple of years of implementation and early responses to new policies put in place, that is the goal that seems like it will really need the most concerted kind of level of focus and effort in order to advance rapid progress. Whereas the other industry recognized credential goals, there's movement in that direction. So a lot of the plan content really focuses on apprenticeship, but we are, of course, cognizant of the entire goal as well. So some key actions under expanding student access involves really kind of centralizing where information is about these opportunities into a place where career counselors, parents, students, other teachers, other people working with students and their families can easily access information about opportunities, and specifically opportunities that are available or are becoming available in the near future. Another one that we've often heard about are requirements for graduation and scheduling, how all that fits together with the real scheduling needs of a registered apprentice while they're still in high school. So MSDE has been a phenomenal partner and thought leader on this, and we've laid out some milestones in this plan around revisiting and updating graduation requirements and guidance to really ensure we're fully supporting flexible scheduling that really can fit a student's graduation needs, a student's registered apprenticeship needs, and the needs of their employer in that apprenticeship. We know transportation is a huge barrier. So that is acknowledged in this plan, and the desire for our agencies and our local stakeholders, especially our local stakeholders on the ground with maybe solutions they've tried, ideas, things they've always wanted to try, to really be thinking about what can we test and then perhaps scale around transportation solutions, especially knowing they're not going to look the same in every community, but recognizing that is one of the top barriers for students interested in these types of apprenticeships that we hear about all across the state, in every expert review team, site visit, in every stakeholder engagement session, you name it. So we couldn't, while it's a huge issue to address, and we don't necessarily have the solution articulated in the plan, acknowledging that that is an area where we need to focus in these next couple of years is articulated there. And we also acknowledge our existing partnerships and opportunity to pilot solutions on transportation or other areas of apprenticeship expansion and expanding student access through our Perkins Reserve grants. We are coming toward the close of the first year of this partnership that we have with MSDE on designing grants to support this goal, and excited to capture our learnings, share those in our November meeting with this committee. And in the meantime, in the interim, also be working on designing the next opportunity to make sure we're really leveraging those resources to support this implementation plan. So some key milestones here laid out for some of those items I just walked through, spanning over the course of into 2027. It's certainly also worth mentioning throughout this section of the plan, there are milestones set out further in the future, some of which are items we really are going to be starting, or that our partners are starting well in advance of the milestone deadline, in order to make sure just that we're sharing these opportunities as they become available to students as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. On process metrics, a few highlighted here. One is that we really want to have some of that information for high school registered apprenticeships available and really actually being utilized, leveraged, accessed by a majority of LEAs, if not 100%, by next summer. So that sets a kind of clear goal that ties to our objective 3 on data in it that I'll talk about in a moment. An additional target around thinking about these resources to start on transportation solutions and actually starting to see some pilots rolling out, and an enrollment metric to really ensure, again, that we're just kind of progressing against our annual targets, and that we're seeing increased engagement specifically from some of that career exploration activity, including through our career counseling program. So really ensuring that that pipeline, that information is really getting to students through the channels that we're trying to target with this plan. And I, of course, invite my colleagues at MSDE to chime in. You guys were sort of tagged as primary number 1 on this, but again, like other objectives, there's certainly activities and milestones within this where we, as our team, are your partners, or the Department of Labor or others are also collaborators as well. But I'll pause, see if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like to add around this objective. Okay. Fantastic. All hearts and minds are clear on objective 2. All right, objective 3. This is where we really see the primary sort of a lead role, I should say, for the board and the committee really coming into play. This is part of our job, right? This is aligning the partner agencies, including through some of the initial work to put this plan in place and clarify it on paper, but the ongoing work around supporting the coordination and collaboration against the plan and the data infrastructure it's going to take to make sure that now that we've set some goals and we've set some milestones, we're actually able to track and measure progress and communicate that not just to one another, also to our local stakeholders, and of course to members of the public as well. So some key actions included in this plan are facilitating some of the work we've started to date around annual growth targets that are built into this plan, and then later our sectoral targets as well. Some work around modernizing data infrastructure. There are pieces of this that MSDE owns and the Department of Labor owns, but really modernizing that data infrastructure so that the imperfections Chair Norton mentioned earlier in the data are increasingly addressed. We can get closer and closer to perfect data to really measure who is completing the specific requirements of a high school level registered apprenticeship before graduation. And we can really report on our progress accurately. We're also going to be responsible for coordinating some of the platforms and tools through which that is made available and accessible on an ongoing basis to the public, in addition to bringing that back to this committee, right? As we go through implementation of this plan, this is really about quarter by quarter, every time this committee meets, at least a large segment of the agenda, if not the full agenda, is focused on key report outs, updates, collaboration and discussion, decision points about work and milestones articulated in this plan, and on the kind of reporting cadence specified for metrics in the plan, that we're checking back against those metrics and really what progress are we seeing? What are we learning about that? What might we need to shift gears on as a collective to keep making progress? So this objective really kind of articulates some of the tools we're using to essentially make sure we're doing that as a committee, and that our partners are well equipped to support and partner with us in that and be bringing information back to us, so we can continue to be supportive in our role as committee members and a staff team. Some milestones we have in place, including for this summer, after approval, hopefully today, making sure we're publishing and disseminating what the annual targets look like, starting to map local level targets in addition to those sector targets. That's something that's going to be an ongoing process and take a high level of partnership, of course, with our local education agencies, in addition to our state partners. We're also going to be making sure we're doing kind of a really clear map, just making sure we're very, very clear on what are the missing data points, what other gaps do we have that we need to be filling in the next year or two. We've done, I would say, probably 80%, maybe more of that in the work leading up to this plan, a few more gaps of information to make sure we're clear on so that we know exactly how we're closing our remaining data gaps in the next few years. And by early next year, our goal is to also launch a public-facing performance dashboard for the 45% goal. This will be as part of a broader performance dashboard effort that the Governor's Workforce Development Board is taking on, with a segment of that really dedicated to this goal and to tracking our progress on our high school registered apprenticeship metrics and our industry recognized credential metrics within that. I think, talked through some of the process metrics here already, but you can see some of those articulated here, including that quarterly reporting through our committee meetings as one key avenue. And I should also mention, of course, that in between these, my team, our team here at the CTE Committee will continue to coordinate at the staff level with agencies on ongoing implementation on a routine cadence through this plan. And that includes, of course, MSD and the Department of Labor, who were super heavy in this plan, but like we mentioned earlier, includes engaging team members from the Department of Commerce and the Higher Education Commission as well, to ensure that we're kind of whole of government, whole of Maryland team effort on this. So a few of those are articulated here. Any questions, additions, team, things I missed that we should highlight here as we talk about Objective 3? Okay. All right. We've got our work cut out for us. I'll quickly touch on the annual targets. We've, I think, covered very well the level of collaboration that this took. I want to especially commend the Department of Labor's apprenticeship team for working super closely with us on the apprenticeship targets, and MSD's College and Career Pathways team on the industry recognized credential targets, and on really kind of parsing out what projections look like for college and career readiness. It's important, I think, to acknowledge all of these. You see projected listed in a lot of places. So all of these start with a projected denominator of projections for college and career readiness among the student population, and then back out to project the 1 and 4 high school level registered apprentices and 3 and 4 by 2031. You'll see some growth targets year over year. Next year, the projected, that first year growth target is from just under 100 actual in the last school year to 300, as we've touched on earlier. And it accelerates from there and goes up to our just over 4,000 in the official kind of goal statement for high school level registered apprentices by 2031 graduation. So again, tons of concerted effort, as we know, to get to that goal. But we think that with the milestones and actions and commitments we have from partners throughout this plan, we're really excited to make some substantial progress. These will be revisited. So as we're tracking against, okay, how do we do last school year? These will be revisited routinely so that we can also, again, understand what types of progress are we making? Where is progress stalling or proving sticky? How can we diagnose root causes and hopefully unblock barriers to continue accelerating progress toward the goal? And I think that concludes my piece here, but we can leave these on the screen here for a moment and just see if anyone has any questions or comments on targets before we move on.
I just want to say, I know there's a lot of work that went into coalescing around these numbers, and there's a lot behind the numbers. So it's not just numbers that have been thrown out here, like finger in the air. It's really, we have a set of hypotheses, right? We've said, okay, there's something like 4,000 registered apprenticeship starts every year. Can 200 of those be for high school students? There's Secretary Wu shared earlier, we have whatever 1,200, 1,300 youth apprenticeships. Can we get a couple hundred of those convert, there? So I guess what I want to communicate to folks who are listening in that maybe haven't been part of the sausage making is there are a lot of really solid hypotheses about how we get to these targets. And to me, the value of having targets like this is well beyond the numbers themselves. It is the discipline that it takes to set those hypotheses and then test them. And then we're going to learn. And if some are going to work better than we think, some aren't going to work as well as we think. And that's how we, get to the North Star. So I just really commend everyone that dug in to yes, come up with these numbers, but even more importantly, the rationale behind the numbers that are going to drive what action various entities take to get us here. So.
I want to thank you also, Madam Chair, for your leadership and like trying to drive this forward. It's a monumental task, and thank you to Rachel and team. I do want to underscore the sector approach. I think is critical. It's so many things have to line up, right? The schools, the transportation, the schedules, but then of course having the employers. And so having those focus areas of sectors and even underneath that, what occupations are we thinking about? I think will really help hopefully drive the progress, because we can't be everything everywhere all at once. Like those are some of the priority areas we're leaning in on. And I just want to assure everyone that Department of Labor will be bringing to bear, not only our apprenticeship team, but also trying to, leverage other resources and partnerships as the board to help and support schools and school districts to get there, because we know it's a lot of systems change for them as well. And so really value our partnership with MSD and others on that.
Thank you. Okay, I think this is the point in the meeting where we're going to take 7 minutes quiet to actually review the plan one last time. This is important. It may seem silly to do this, but I think it's really important actually to take a few minutes just to go back through the plan one more time before we have final discussion and then vote. So Molly's put a link to the plan in the chat if you don't have it handy. I know Catherine sent it out earlier as well. And so let's plan to, it is, if I have the time right, y'all keep me honest, 11:56. So let's plan to come back here at, call it 12:03. Is that right? Okay. See you in 7 minutes. Okay, I think we are at 12:03. So, Shamira, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Myra. And I hope you all had enjoyed the 7 minutes to take a quick refresher to read or review at least the executive summary for the joint CTE vision implementation plan. That's a lot of words. Catherine, can you move to the next slide so we can engage in a bit of discussion? So I want to open the floor for us to chat a bit about the plan as you reviewed it, and two pressing questions that we have is what will have the greatest impact on achieving the 45% goal, and what actions can the CTE committee or the full Governor's Workforce Development Board take to help remove some of the barriers and accelerate this work. And so I'll pause there and open the floor up for any conversation, comments, feedback you all might have.
Don't be shy, guys.
Please don't. Or did, as we were sharing the plan, that we get some of the feedback out in the open already as we were, sharing out the plan as is, but still want to create a space for you all to share a little bit more.
I mean, to me, there's like two major high-level shifts that have to happen. One is deep employer engagement to really understand, how to have that many additional apprenticeship slots available in the state. And so that's and that's everything from industries that already have apprenticeships to industries that have never had apprenticeships. And so that is, in terms of what will have the greatest impact, there's sort of our ability to understand employer needs, employer what their workforce strategies are, and how apprenticeship helps to meet the needs of the business. Like if what we're doing does not meet the needs of businesses, then this is not sustainable, right? So that's one, and then two is it is a big shift for schools and school systems to think about accommodating that volume of students participating in registered apprenticeships. So I guess that's the way I think about it. Those are like the two really big changes and shifts that are going to happen, and they're going to happen at micro and macro levels.
Madam Chair, if I can, I know I've been talking a lot, so apologies, but obviously
So have I. So please, other people talk.
Yeah, I think these plans are useful. It is useful to have big picture number goals, but the fact of the matter is, like, we only get to those goals by not an LMI data analysis, but by a concerted ground campaign. And that is where, the milestones are helpful, but what does have to happen now, and I do think we need to think about how do we use this committee, how we use the board to have that ground campaign coordination work. Okay, we say these are the priorities. What does that mean? That means this month in Harford County, we're really helping bring together industry around X, or right, and these this is what that it has to translate into very concrete steps and actions, and that's where you often see plans fall apart. So I do think that turn, and the question is what actions. I think, engaging all the members of this committee, of the GWIB, our sister agencies, our agencies and leaders at the local level, is going to be critical to that, because we need to have those sort of champions helping us drive this forward at that very tactical level. Otherwise, we won't make progress.
100%.
This is Sharnetta Callahan. Well, some of the things that I do like about it from an employer perspective, what I think will create the greatest impact is the employer recruitment, expansion of sponsorships, the creation of new apprenticeship programs, like all of those, and especially the conversion of the existing youth apprenticeship programs. So I think that those are the things that will impact the most. As we talk about impacting the least, some of these things are helpmates to the work that we're trying to achieve. And so I think the data modernization, the dashboard and things like that help us to keep track of what we're doing. But to Secretary Wu's perspective, what are the grassroots efforts that we have to implement or that these local agencies have to implement to kind of help drive these objectives? And so my concern is where do we, not we, but where are we going to be able to see the work that's being done that feeds into these objectives outside of the dashboard, like the real life kind of work? And so that's one of the things that I still question, but I think we have a good plan to start.
It's a great point.
I'll jump on my soapbox.
Go, Brian.
About post-secondary, recognizing apprenticeship as post-secondary education. I think that probably every meeting we have, maybe we get a little bit closer to that, but I don't know that we have been as successful as we would like to be getting there. And that some of these employers may think that they need a post-secondary degree and that apprenticeship doesn't fulfill that. And the more that we can educate people that it can fulfill that, the better we're going to be. I liked what Secretary Quiroz said earlier, and I think I got this right, that 75% of Maryland residents in an age group that was in the 20s, sorry, I didn't catch the numbers, the goal to have them have a post-secondary education, which includes apprenticeship, is awesome, right? Because right now, I think that our goal is, and maybe even the legislation said 55% is an associate's degree and 45% has graduated a high school level apprenticeship, but that we've said 70, or that that MHEC has said 75% higher education that includes apprenticeship. Great. We're getting to recognize apprenticeship as post-secondary education. And the more that we can get both the employers in our state and the parents in our state to recognize that, I think the more successful we'll be in getting people to participate in apprenticeship.
That's great. Secretary, please. I see your hand.
Thank you. And I appreciate Member Cavey or Coffey's point. Apologies. I know last names have become a thing during the meeting today, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate that comment, right? So higher education, post-secondary education, we talked about this a bit at the last meeting. We've adopted this new goal. It's complementary, right? So it's not a 100 minus 45 then equals the 55. These two goals are meant to be complementary to one another. So we now have a goal that is related to high school and now a goal related to post-secondary completion. In the middle sits this really interesting work related to apprenticeships, which we're happy to count towards our goal because we agree with everything that Brian and others on this committee and GWIB and more broadly in the community have said about the need to count apprenticeships as part of our post-secondary credential attainment. So it's great that we have alignment. I agree that plans are great and implementation is where things start to become very real. Planning processes are also very helpful and there's been so much work to date. So the one only additional reaction that I would offer as a response to that second question, and I don't necessarily want to create more work, and perhaps this has already been done, but having a true understanding, at least on the whole of government approach, of who is talking to who, and how are we aligning those conversations. I know when we talk to employers, we're now starting to have conversations around skills and competencies, which feels a lot easier to manage in a conversation around credentials and degrees. And so we're seeing a lot of movement that way. So we're happy to share some of those lessons learned. But I'm always concerned about multiple agencies going to the same employer and having different conversations and then frustrating our partners outside of government. So would just kind of continue to ask for that type of whole of government coordination as we move towards implementation so that we can speak one voice with our employer partners and not ask for too much.
Such a great point. And I can see Secretary Wu is nodding her head as well in agreement. I think that, to me, part of like one of the first things that's going to happen is this sector strategy that you've talked about, Secretary Wu. Like, I think when you talk about driving things on the ground, the way, at least in my experience, the way you actually do that to achieve outcomes is you have to start with like, okay, what the work that's being done now? What are the sectors we're going after? And then how are we aligning all the folks, that are having conversations with employers in this sector so that we're moving towards the goals that we have instead of having, to Secretary's point, instead of having, 5 agencies have 5 conversations with the same employer, that's real frustrating. And so I think my hope is that this implementation plan is designed to galvanize all the players around a common set of goals, not just one goal, but like, okay, so this sector, here's how we're tackling it, and here's who needs to be involved, and here's the roles that everybody plays. And there has to be a lead, agency, entity, person, whatever, that is helping to do that. It doesn't happen on its own. And I think that's my hope for what comes of what we've laid out here.
And Sharon Norton, if you don't mind, I'd love to just ask a follow-up question. And I agree completely with Secretary Wu's thoughts related to sector-specific approaches and strategies. I am curious about regional approaches as well, if that's a consideration. And I know a lot of us have been working on trying to get federal grants. And there is this conversation around state versus regional. Not sure if that's something that we could speak to for just a second, coupling sector-specific strategies with the needs of different regions in the state.
I'll just speak for myself, and then any Shamira, Rachel, anyone who wants to jump in on this. But I think absolutely, I would say my observation is that our strategies have been largely local and regional, and that should continue. And we're also probably missing scale for certain sectors that simply won't happen unless we take a statewide approach, unless we take a, to like figure it out in the macro and then how it plays out regionally. But my personal view is yes, we absolutely have to have both for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that different sectors are stronger in different parts of the state than others, and also that there's always going to be an element of smaller industries and or companies that want to participate here, and we need to make that possible as well. I don't know if others want to jump in.
And then, Secretary, to your question about the regionality, we do, our navigators are regionally based. I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not able to see. Oh, Chris is on, great. I know Director Chris McLarian is on. I don't know if he is able to speak or say something to that, but we do have like navigators that focus on regions. And you're absolutely right, given our anchor institutions and strong leaders that we have in the community college system, it really makes sense to leverage that capacity there. Great. And I see actually Brad Phillips is on too. So want to recognize our colleagues out there in that world.
Any other comments, questions?
See another hand.
I think
Oh, yeah, Chris, go ahead. Sorry. I can't see everybody's squares, so somebody's gonna have to tell me if I miss a hand. Go ahead, Chris.
No worries. Thank you, Chair Norton. I was just going to elaborate what the Secretary both mentioned and asked me to put more in. We have a staff of 26, and of that, we are regionally based, as the Secretary mentioned. We have navigators in every local workforce area across the state, and they do cover, in some cases, small territories. Like we have 2 staff in Prince George's County. In other areas, we might have 1 staff that covers multiple counties, like Harford County and Cecil County is covered by 1 person. But we do have quite a few people on the ground that are doing this as their full-time position, and it is regionally based.
Thanks, Chris.
That's great. I think that was all super well said and well articulated. And Chris, thank you for jumping in with some of that too. I know that was also something we really considered in drafting the plan before the committee today, and getting that balance. Chair Norton, to your point, I think that's going to be central to the strategy really taken for each sector moving forward. Are there any other kind of thoughts or reflections in response to these couple of questions? Otherwise, I'll do my best to kind of summarize what I think we're hearing before we move on and maybe give folks some time back.
Well, I saw there's some other questions in the Q&A. I don't know if we got to those. I apologize.
Oh, thank you. Great. I think some of these the team was maybe answering live. Oh, these are great questions. Thank you so much for flagging those. Okay, and thank you, audience members, for these questions. First one, I might actually call on colleagues with the Department of Labor, Chris, maybe dust that microphone back off. But one is, what incentives, if any, are available for employers who participate in this program, which I take to mean high school level registered apprenticeship? Kenya, you can please let me know if we misheard, especially those providing some of these. It sounds like there's two parts of this question. One might be incentives for high school level registered apprenticeship participation among employers, and whether there are also incentives for employers providing other types of career connected learning. So maybe we can start with Chris and then invite our MSDE colleagues to chime in on kind of the second part of question 1 from Kenya. And then we can jump to the next question.
Sure. Happy to help, Rachel. And if I understood the question right, what incentives are there for employers if they're hiring and registering an apprentice in the high school level? Is that right?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay, sure. So we're very fortunate that in the RAISE Act, there was legislation passed which formalized a grant process that we have, and we were provided funding for it. I'm going to drop it in the chat in a minute if I'm able to do that, Rachel. But we have a grant program right now that's open for both high school level and non-high school level apprentices. The great thing about it, and it's called the Maryland Apprenticeship Incentive Program. The great thing about the grant program for the high school level is it will pay for up to $7,500 of the cost of bringing on board and training a high school level registered apprentice. And that can help pay for the tuition, outreach, advertising to bring an apprentice in, related, supportive service items that the apprentice might need to go through the program. If you hire an adult level, it's for $3,000. So it's a fair amount of money to offset some of those costs to help make it a little bit more amenable for the employer and make it more sustainable as well. I'll drop that in the chat in a minute for you, Rachel.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. Perfect. And we're really excited about some of those incentives. And MSD colleagues, anything you'd like to add about incentives for employers participating in other career connected learning, not directly kind of addressed in this plan, work-based learning, job shadowing, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So Richard Kincaid, Assistant State Superintendent, College and Career Pathways at MSD. For this work, it requires us to do a number of things on the school side. First is a project that we started about 18 months ago, which is the redesign of coursework within CTE programs and defining what CTE programs look like to provide opportunities in career-connected learning, which it comes at the end, grades 11 and 12, for our CTE students to participate in this system. So over the past 18 months, my team has been working with LEs across the state on foundational systemic implementation for that new CTE system. We also recognize that in order to meet all of the goals within this vision, it's going to take more than just students sitting in CTE classrooms. to achieve what the state of Maryland aspires students to have opportunities in, which is why we've designed the Career Connected Learning System. There is a plethora of resources on my team's website at MSDE that details what career connected learning is, the ways that our classrooms can implement these opportunities for students, but also supports that are available along the way. Ultimately, we all have a coordinated effort within our spheres of influence, right? So on the education side, our responsibility is to make sure that students are well prepared to move into career connected learning, registered apprenticeship, dual enrollment, and all of those opportunities that the blueprint provides for them. With our partners at Labor and Commerce and MHEC and others across the state, the connective tissue starts to form so that when on the school side we have students that are ready, there are seats for them to move into these opportunities. It's less about how do we rethink how we're teaching at the moment, and more about how are we redesigning the system in order to make sure that it doesn't get in the way of student access and opportunity. And so that's where the core of the documentation lives. That being said, if there are specific needs within a particular school system across our state, please reach out to my team. We have a number of school support coordinators that are well equipped to provide thought leadership, but also provide technical training and to help meet the needs of students and teachers in every classroom in Maryland. So feel free to reach out for more.
Thanks, Richard. Super helpful. And I think we also have a few questions from Shay Lewis Cisco in the audience, and that I'd love to, Richard, maybe tee you up to support addressing. Shay, thank you for your great questions. You mentioned kind of yes on the state level coordination and need for kind of some scaling strategies at the state level. However, how do we incorporate that coordination in alignment with LEAs? Specifically around apprenticeship placements and what that looks like. The way I take that two-part question is really supporting that coordination at the LEA navigator level. And then I also see a question, I'm going to put these together because I think they can perhaps be addressed together in some ways. What approach is being taken to educate local education agencies on how apprenticeships should be working? And I think this is a great question. This is something we all really kind of talked about and kind of unpacked as we were working through this plan. There are some milestones derived from those conversations and kind of that shared acknowledgement that there's more to do when it comes to educating all the right people at the district level, as well as working with folks in individual schools and starting to shape some new things the state can do to support that more. But I'll kind of pause there just to acknowledge these are all the right questions, some of which we start to address in the plan. But Richard, happy to punt it back to you if you have anything you'd like to add on these.
Yeah, thank you for your questions, Shay. Good to hear from you. It's been a long time. Specifically around apprenticeship placements, we know that students' schedules sometimes get in the way of them being able to go into the world of work. And it's a complicated question that leads to a few complicated answers. And we're hoping to simplify these. Here are a couple of solutions that MSD is currently working through. One, we know that if there's high quality career guidance that happens in middle school and a 6-year plan is developed thoughtfully with a community of partners, then it creates better opportunity for that student to have a flexible schedule by the time they reach the point that they're wanting to move into an apprenticeship. And so our career counseling system is a partnership with many of the people that are on this call. And once that begins rolling through the system, then on the student side, we're less likely to face issues of a student reaching their junior year, recognizing they have a bunch of courses that they still need to take, which prevent them from doing some of the work release opportunities that are so very much needed within the apprenticeship space. That's one. Two, Sometimes it's not even the student's fault, right? Sometimes the schedule of school gets in the way. Like we've built structures that make sense to adults, but don't necessarily provide the best opportunities and outcomes for students. We're working to modify that. In fact, on July 22nd, here in 2 very short weeks, we'll be adding a new position, onboarding a new position on my team, Director of the High School Experience, which will begin working with our 6 CCL pilot LEAs on ways to begin reconceptualizing the high school schedule so that we can begin building a repository of what works to then scale across the state. So she'll be on board later on this month. And then those pieces will start to fall into place so that we can eliminate some of those systemic barriers that present very real challenges for students.
Thanks, Richard. Awesome. And I see we have a couple more questions rolling in too. So my team is dropping this into the chat, I think probably imminently because I got a time check as well, but we will be glad to follow up with answers to some of the questions we've received in chat, assuming we have your contact information, which I believe we do as part of your RSVP for this meeting. And anyone else with additional questions, please feel free to reach out to our CT Committee email address that goes straight to our CT Committee staff team. Would be happy to make sure we're facilitating continued dialogue and answer some of these really good questions. Thank you all so much. And I think with that, and Molly, I'll thank you for dropping that information into the chat for members of our viewing public as well. I think with that, I'll turn the agenda back over to Chair Norton and Senior Director Bowens.
Great, thank you so much, and really great questions. Please keep them coming. If even the ones we can't answer live, we will definitely get responses to. So really appreciate the engagement. Okay, if there is no further discussion or questions on the implementation plan, may I hear a motion to approve the plan?
Motion to approve.
May I have a second?
Second.
Any last minute discussion questions before we move to a full vote? Okay, all in favor of approving the plan as presented? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, committee members. The plan has been approved. We will, the plan now is going to go before the State Board of Education and the AIB at their respective board meetings later this month. So assuming all goes well there, by the end of the month, we should have a finalized, approved joint CTE vision implementation plan. It is a mouthful, Shamara, you're right. Okay, thank you all very much for a very robust discussion. And Richard, appreciate you jumping in on some of the questions there. And now I'm going to turn it over to you to give us an update on Perkins.
Thank you. So good afternoon again, Chair Norton and members of the CTE Committee. I want to spend a few minutes on the foundational federal funding stream that quietly does a lot of the work for career and technical education across Maryland, and then walk you through a specific opportunity that we're planning for later on this summer. A refresher was provided about a year ago, and I know that we have a few new members, and so hopefully this very high level of what Perkins is and how funds are allocated answers some of your questions. The Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act is the main federal law that funds CTE nationally. The current version, known as Perkins 5, took effect in 2019. And every year it sends formula money to states to strengthen CTE at both the high school and community college levels, with an emphasis on high quality programs of study, alignment to real in-demand careers, strong accountability, and access for students who have been historically underserved. For the coming year, Maryland's total Perkins allocation, we had a sigh of relief earlier this week. We were able to draw it down from the new federal labor system. And our FY27 allocation sits at roughly $20.8 million. When that money comes in, it splits along a few very predictable lines. About $1 million or 5% supports state administration uses. Around $2.1 million or 10% goes to state leadership activities, and those percentages are set within statute. The large majority, about $17.7 million or 85%, flows directly out to local recipients, meaning our school systems and our community colleges. That local share is the engine of the program. Here's where it gets interesting. And this is the piece that I think we really want you to have an understanding of today. Most of that local money goes out by a fixed federal formula, driven largely by poverty data and enrollment for each county across the state. We don't control where the money lands, but the law gives states one deliberate exception. Within the local share, we are allowed to set aside what's called a reserve fund. The reserve is different in one crucial way. The state decides how to distribute it. It doesn't have to follow the federal formula. Federal law does put guardrails on it because we know there's no such thing as free federal dollars. Reserve dollars have to go to recipients in one of four categories, and they could be duplicative, right? We have to fund areas that are rural, areas with high numbers of CTE students, areas with a high percentage of CTE students, or areas showing gaps or disparities in performance. The purpose Congress had in mind was innovation, giving states a way to seed new ideas and target the need that the formula alone would likely miss. So think of the reserve as our steering wheel. The formula keeps the lights on across the state. The reserve lets us point resources at the priorities we actually want to move. In Maryland, we award it through a targeted competitive grants program rather than a formula, which means we can attach it directly to any of our strategic goals. Which brings me to what we are thinking about designing for this year in partnership with you all. For the coming fiscal year, Maryland's reserve stands at approximately $884,000. It's not a large sum against a $20.8 million program, but because we control how it's spent, it carries outsized strategic weight. The CTE vision lays out an ambitious body of work, and candidly, some of it asked our school systems and colleges to move faster and think differently than the formula funding alone will support. Formula dollars keep existing programs running. They are not designed to spark new practice. That's exactly the gap that the reserve is meant to fill. Our intent this year is to use the reserve as innovation capital, seeding the kind of forward work that the CTE vision that you all just adopted calls for, rather than backfilling those everyday sort of keep the lights on experiences. We're keeping the scope deliberately broad at this stage, and that's intentional because this is where we want to invite you in to help us form and shape what this year's grant needs to look like. The CTE committee will have an opportunity to work directly with MSD and my team in particular to determine how we craft these reserve funds to support the CTE vision for Maryland Public Schools. Rather than bringing you a finished plan, we want your best thinking on where this money can do the most good, which priorities from the vision implementation plan we need to advance, and how to structure the opportunities so our local education agencies across the state can design bold proposals that fit their local context. Over the next few weeks, we'll be working with the staff and team at the CTE committee to shape the application design together. And my hope is that we will bring back to this committee those ideas for your input before we finalize. So in short, too long didn't read summary. Perkins this year, about $20.8 million. The reserve is roughly $884,000, and that's the slice that we get to steer. And this year, we're looking forward to creating an innovative, competitive grant program in coordination with you all.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, thanks again, Richard, for that update. And so now we'll get into what's up next for the CTE committee through the third quarter, as well as the end of this year. Next slide, please, Catherine. Okay, so our priorities over the next few months include moving into advancing the new vision implementation plan. We will also coordinate with state agency partners, our sister agencies, to continue to move this work forward. We will be also just strengthening that agency coordination, and again, just strengthening us for a successful implementation. Again, receiving all the feedback that you all shared today and the questions that will help us to refine the work that we've already started and moving this forward. We have our CTE ERT visits scheduled for this fall. The CTE ERT visits are very important as they help to continue to inform the work for the implementation plan and help us to learn about what's happening on the ground at the schools and how we can make recommendations to legislators about what is needed in terms of resources, restructuring the CTE ERT plan. Also, next slide, Catherine, please. Or is this, I'm sorry. This might be Chair Norton, but Catherine, can you go back to the previous slide? Just want to make sure. Again, in terms of the CTE ERT visits, the dates are available and we will be contacting the CTE committee members. We want you to come visit and go with us on some of these visits. Again, you have the implementation plan and there are those 3 goals. And so we want you to come provide feedback and learn again about what's going on. So we have our first date set up in October. We will send an email and the follow-up with a sign-up form to join us. And then we will, again, move towards those meetings with our sister agencies. I think I touched on everything. We have a lot of work to do between now and the end of the year, but definitely prioritizing the ERT visits. And we will be producing a 2-pager about our findings from phase 1 with the CTE ERT visits, some of the data that we collected, some strengths and opportunities for us to grow, and again, legislative recommendations for next year as we try to restructure the CTE implementation. CTE ERT visits in partnership with the AIB. So I'll pause there. And if not, I will hand it back over to Chair Norton.
Thank you, Shamara. Okay, so this is what we've got ahead of us, everyone. Just be on the lookout for that 2-page report. That is the next body of work we need to do is really understand kind of what we've learned in the first phase of the expert review team's visits and how that informs what we think needs to happen going forward with those. Okay, next slide. I think we're about ready to wrap up. Just a reminder, we're always looking for meeting locations. I know it says 2026 meeting locations, but probably we'll be asking the same for 2027. So please reach out if anyone has suggestions or wants to host. We'll have a Governor's Workforce Development Board virtual public meeting in August. The exact date is TBD. And then September 23rd is the quarterly meeting of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. That will be hybrid. And then our next committee meeting also will be hybrid. That's November 19th. So you'll receive calendar invites and more information via email, but just to flag that here. If there is no additional business or anything else we need to discuss, I will accept a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Awesome. I got a motion and a second. I think we're good. All in favor of adjourning? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you all very much for being here today. This was a really important meeting, a great discussion, and we'll follow up once the other 2 board meetings have taken place just to confirm the final version of the implementation plan. So thanks everyone for all your work. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Have a great summer.